Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to be here this morning and, of course, to have such a great panelists that are going to come at my presentation. So thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you to the Center for organizing this event for us. And, of course, I am accompanied by Daniel Titelman and Noel, who are the two real authors of this document with their teams. Inés Bustillo. And I'm very happy to see here Teresa Terminacion. She's really the godmother of the fiscal seminar we organize every year. And this Fiscal Panorama actually is presented there. So this is the one we presented this year. And why I think to be on the right spot, I would say that the regional context is very much attached to the global context as well. And the global context is getting very complicated, as we all know. Even we are expecting less growth this year from last year, probably around 2.6% at the global level, which is less than what that was forecasted initially. Also, the economic growth in Latin America remains very weak, and with a lot of differences between countries. And of course, it's only, I would say, the driver of this growth is basically private consumption, which is again a sort of a vulnerability of the type of growth we have. And I think it's going to be, I'm going to show you a little bit later what are the figures. Fiscal consolidation has resulted in improvements, of course, in the primary balance, no question about it, but there has been a much smaller contribution to public spending. And that's also a trade-off that the region has been paying. Public investment also remains the main variable of adjustment. And actually, public investment is so important because it's really the bridge between the short and the middle term. And this region has been, in a certain way, not putting enough attention to public investment. And despite these fiscal adjustments, the trajectory of the public debt is on the rise. I hope you can see the last line. But you can't, right? But it's not, it doesn't matter. But the thing is that the trajectory of you have it on the other screens. 14 countries of the region have been increasing their public debt. When we talk about growth, this is what we in early April forecasted. We forecasted 1.3% for the region, but now we are much more pessimistic. We believe that the growth in the region is going to be less than 1%. And the most interesting, not interesting, but the bad news is that it's going to be a synchronic decrease in all countries. It's not going to be one or the other. All the countries are going down in terms of their on their forecast. And as you can see, there are some economies that are worse. I made it. That are worse than others. You cannot see, but you will find out that Venezuela is minus 16%. Our forecast, the IMF is even more pessimistic. But the most preoccupying part, I think, is Argentina, minus 1.8. But also that economy is really very vulnerable. I would say that the good ones are on the top: Dominican Republic, Panama. Some of the Caribbean countries are quite good. Bolivia is a very interesting case, Bolivia, because Bolivia was one of the countries that remained putting attention to public investment. And that was one of the reasons why they more or less have a good performance. But you can see that Central America, of course, is doing much better than South America, no? And South America is going to do worse. As I said, all of the countries will do worse this year. Now, what are the main components of the fiscal situation, or the main message I would like to leave with you? First of all, is that fiscal consolidation continues in Latin America, and the ones who have made major efforts is the Caribbean. And the efforts they have done are very noticeable in the sense that here you can see that in Latin America, this is Latin America, this is the Caribbean, but in Latin America, you will find that here the primary, let's say, expenditure has gone down, yes, and the total revenues have been stable, but the total expenditure is 21%. So we have a little gap here, which is a minus 2.8, which is, we have a primary, let's say, expenditure, we have a primary, deficit here, minus 0.2%, but the global deficit is minus 2.8 because it includes the payment of the interest rates. And here in the Caribbean side, you will see that all of it goes up, and they have made a tremendous effort to keep the primary expenditure a little bit higher. And of course, the primary balance, 1.3, positive. And of course, with less, in certain way, global balance is minus 1.5 but they have made a tremendous effort basically related to the debt. Now, the public revenues have remained stable, but they are very insufficient to meet the development requirements. That's part of the problem. The problem is that when you see the, here we are, when you see Latin America, you will see that the tax revenues, 15.6%, are stable, no? And other revenues are going a little bit downwards. When you go to South America, it's really preoccupying because it's going down. And when you go, I'm sorry, this is Central America and the Dominican Republic, and this is South America. So you will see tax revenues, other revenues, and this is in general the structure of the central governments. And here you see the Caribbean countries which have made more efforts in certain way to move into more revenues. Now, one of the major problems of Latin America and the Caribbean that we have been studying for the last years is tax evasion. I mean, we have a problem of fiscal consolidation. We have a problem, indeed, of expenditures. But here is the main problem. The problem is tax evasion. When you go to, in certain way, what is the estimated tax evasion in 2017 is 6.3 of GDP. That's a lot of money. We're talking about $335 billion. So this is where the tax non-compliance of income tax is the one that we have here, 4% here in income tax and 2.3% on value-added tax. So adding these two, we have 6.3% of GDP, which is being tax evasion only. This side of the equation, we are showing another thing, which is the goods trade misinvoicing, which means that a product, when a product leaves the country, let's say, that is undervalued. When it reaches the country of destiny, is overvalued. So somebody is losing here. And the loss we have calculated more or less, or the cost of misinvoicing is $85 billion, more or less 1% of GDP, more or less. So, and then of course, the other element that we are highlighting in this particular report is the cost of, I would say, of losses arising from evasion. As you can see, they are equivalent to the projected revenues, they are even less than the projected revenues of the reforms that the countries have undertaken. All these countries of the region, all of them, have taken 17 tax reforms between 2010 and 2015. So it's not that they have not undertaken tax reform. They have done it. And they have done it even, some of them have been very progressive on, for example, on taxing the income rates and taxing the income, the IPRs. But the thing is that even with all these efforts that these countries have made, the expected additional revenues average 1%, which is more or less the cost of the misinvoicing on illicit flows, But if you compare this with the tax evasion, 6.3, I mean, it's more or less clear what the region needs to do. Now, the region needs, of course, to improve its tax structure. That's number one. If we see the tax structure of the OECD, we will compare with the OECD. The blue one is OECD, and Latin America is the green. And you can see clearly that we are 5.3 points distance between what OECD is able to collect in terms of income tax versus 6.1% of the Latin American region. If we go to social security contributions, again, there is a big gap, 5.24 percentage points. The one we are now entering into very much, and you can see we are highlighting it very much, is the property tax, that we have not been able to pull together an efficient property right. And the distance between us and the OECD is almost 2 times. So again, there's space here, space here, space here. Where we are more or less in the same vein, let's say, or in the same levels, is in the VAT, in the goods and services taxing. Now, the other thing we are exploring in this report, which I hope you will find interesting, is what is the region thinking in terms of other sources of taxation? The case of the digital economy, for example, which everybody's thinking about it, and countries are doing very different things about the thing. So what we have seen is that the current tax system is not, I would say, not up to the challenge of the digital economy. That's the problem. That the whole, let's say, design of the traditional tax system is weak, and it's favoring, because the tax system is more for goods and services or for income or for property, but we are in certain way is in favor the system of the erosion of tax revenues from the digital economy. And that's why even developed countries are trying to find ways on how to tax the Googles, the Apples, the Ubers and the Airbnbs and companies. In our region, 8 countries have taken some initiatives in the field of taxation of digital services. Basically, the one who did it first was Peru. They were really very interesting because they did it very early in 2003. And the recent legal changes have come from Argentina, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Uruguay. And some that are implementing administrative measures are Chile, Mexico, and Paraguay. Now, this is not uniform. This is only starting. But there are two ways of collecting taxes today in the region, at least in these 8 countries. Number one is tax measures focused on value-added taxes, again, to the consumer or to the intermediary. I mean, if you're buying a digital service, you're going to be taxed through your credit card, through the system, you're going to do it. But the other one, which I think is also interesting, is what Chile and Mexico are trying, which is a tax on the gross revenues of the companies. Now, this is becoming more difficult, but indeed, I think that's where we have to move at the end of the day. So I think it's urgent. One of the urgencies we have in Latin America and the world, I would say, is to improve the tax system for a growing digital economy that we don't know how we are going to, how are we going to innovate on this side. The other case we analyze in the report is the case of the environmental taxation. And that's also something that, as you know, is very much today in the discussion. Of course, France can tell us a little bit about los chalecos amarillos and how they face they wanted to put some overpricing or a sort of a tax into gasoline, and everybody was very angry. But I have to say that in the case of the region, these are the countries that have put some sort of environmental taxes, and this is the percentage of total revenues. And these taxes are basically linked to fuel, are linked to automotive, to cars, who's using cars that are more older or newer or whatever. And of course, we also have, that is vehicle emissions and waste. Colombia and Ecuador are doing a lot of taxation on wastes, and also on water, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Mexico. And indeed, the carbon tax is not being used in Latin America and the Caribbean. That's part of the problem. But yes, taxing on fuels is an issue that is coming up more and more. And you can see that in Latin America and the Caribbean, in terms of percentage of total tax revenues, we are around 6.4, 17 countries, and 13% of GDP. So this is something that is coming more and more, and we hope that it will be a good place. And the other one is the taxes that are motivated by public health, for example, alcohol and tobacco. We think that these two types of taxes, together with others, with sugar, for example, the drinks with sugar and all this, people are more open for these taxes. We have found that in a certain way, the community in a certain way is more favoring these type of taxes because it's related to their health. So there are some countries that have done this already, like, for example, Argentina, and tobacco is, I think, the most popular in Argentina and in Chile and Venezuela, of course. But you can see that most countries are either looking at this, putting more taxes on this, and this is something that is very interesting. Now, on the side of expenditure, which I think is the other side of the equation in taxing, is we have to look at two things. First of all, of course, there is a relative stability on the, in a certain way, on the primary current expenditure, no? 22, which is stable. What is growing is the capital expenditure is the one that we believe it should be growing. This is the Caribbean. But look at Latin America, it's going down. And what is going up is the interest rates. So in the expenditure, we are in the primary current expenditure, we are going down. We are going down also on the capital expenditure, and we are going up in the interest rates, contrary to what's happening in the Caribbean. But the most worrisome side is here. If you see the curves, you will see that there was a point in 2011, more or less, when our capital expenditure was 4.2 and our interest rates were 1.7, was low. As we were talking with you, Nancy, the debt of the level of the debt was very low in that moment. But today, unfortunately, the majority of the countries, as I said before, 14, have increased their debt, and the interest payments are going up, and of course the capital expenditures are going down. So that's a problem. If debt could be used for investment, that'd be different. But if we are using debt for current expenditure, that's the problem. Now, and we also believe that the cost of social protection is very much linked, and it's going to be linked to the demographic transition, and this is going to put an increasing pressure on the side of expenditure. If you can see, for example, the cases of, you can see here in the case of social protection, look at Brazil. Brazil went up from 6.7 to 11.2. And the case of Brazil, this is Brazil, I'm sorry, this is Argentina. So in any event, I mean, they are going up, of course, all of them. This is health spending. But there are two things here. One is that people are getting older, so social protection is going to be very important. And secondly, the nature of the epidemiology is changing, because we are going to non-transmissible, ¿cómo se dice? Chronic. So those chronic are more costly than the previous occasion. So that's where we are. Now, the other element that we analyze very profoundly for the first time, I guess, is what is the preferential tax treatments? We call it los privilegios, the culture of privileges. Who is enjoying this? Should we review them? There are cases that we should definitely review because, of course, we have tax expenditures as a share of central governments, and on average, they are equivalent to 17% of budgetary expenditures. So we should look at this. Where are they going? Are they going, for example, for VAT? This is the level, more or less, the composition of tax expenditures in Colombia. 83% go to VAT, 17% to income tax. But country by country. So what we are suggesting is that each country should look at their tax expenditure, the foregone revenue. We don't mean to say that you should dismantle it, but just why don't we analyze if they are really being, let's say, cost efficient in terms of investment or in terms of social expenditures. We have to look into this. And if we do it properly, we might be then able to see if these tax expenditures, and of course tax evasion, by the way, could be used to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We only put here 3 examples. Of course, the example of the renewable energy, because we really believe, for example, that the region is moving very quickly towards renewable energy, particularly South America. And Eric, you can attest to that, because really Chile, for example, is moving very quickly to renewable energy with the private sector, not with public investment. So, but if we have the right incentives and if we have accelerated depreciation, deductions of tax. I mean, honestly, these tax expenditures should be looked at with the new lens, and we believe that the Sustainable Development Goals is a way to do this. Deduction or credits for clean production, or for forest plantations, or for low carbon consumer goods, that is, tax incentives for the adoption of clean technology. I mean, how to reorganize the vision on this. And as I said before, and with this I'm starting to close, is that the debt in the countries has gone upwards. In spite of the consolidation efforts, you can see that this debt has gone really up. And as I said, if that debt could be used for investment, that wouldn't be so bad. But the problem is that debt associated with the reduction of the primary expenditures, I mean, maybe it's badly used. That's what we are concerned about. And you can see how the debt went down at some point, but how it's going up again, reaching some of the levels we used to have in the 50s. In the 2000 and so forth. Of course, one of the countries that we need to look carefully is Argentina, right? Argentina is 86% of GDP. It was 95. And what is 86? Not for the right reasons. It's because the denominator has changed. Inflation is going up. So that's why it's not for the right reasons. But you can see that Argentina and Brazil are the most indebted countries in between these 2 years. But all of them have increased their debt, their public debt. And in a nutshell, you see the challenge of the middle income country. The problem we have is that we are putting the SDGs financing on the hands of national governments. We are saying mobilize domestic resources as the main source to finance the SDGs, which I think it's not going to be the only thing we can do. It cannot be. So, because if you see Latin America, the tax revenues on 2017, percentage of GDP, 21%, versus 34 of the developed countries. Even the Caribbean is better than us. The Caribbean are doing much better than Latin America. If you go to public expenditures, you will see that Latin America is around 12%. SDGs will require much more additional resources. Developed countries are already investing 29% only in these matters, which is education, health, social protection, and infrastructure. So our gaps, and this is something we are very clearly saying to the international community, if you think that Latin America and the Caribbean are middle-income countries and they're going to be graduated because they are doing better, no, we are not doing better. We have very critical gaps, and that's why we are working on this concept of development in transition. We brought some material for you on this regard. So, in conclusion, this report is offering 3 sets of recommendations. 2, of course, all of this is attached to Agenda 2030, which we believe has to enhance the mobilization of fiscal resources. But first, we have to broaden the fiscal space. So the first thing to do is reduce tax evasion. That's number 1. And that has to do with the administration of the fiscal institutions. Adopt environmental and health taxes on the digital economy. Rethink tax expenditures, and strengthen taxation on personal income and property. So those areas in which we identify where we can probably broaden the fiscal space. The second one is how to increase the effectiveness of public spending and investment. And that is, we believe that public expenditures and the social expenditure should be protected in 2 fronts. I'll put an example. The cash transfers in Latin America, the very successful program of cash transfers, cost to the economy 0.33% of GDP. 0.3% of GDP. Please, And the tax, let me make a contrast with the Mexican case. The tax expenditures of Mexico, los privilegios, are 3.3 of GDP, 10 times more. And then if we consider the costs of the labor inclusion programs, is 0.4%. 0.4%. So again, we're talking about 0.7% that we can do things very efficiently on social and labor inclusion. And of course, how can we orient public investment towards innovative technologies based on natural resources, energy efficiency, and so forth? And of course, public-private agreements to boost infrastructure and renewable energy. We are doing a report that will come soon. I hope you will be interested on this. Where is the money? That's the name of the report, isn't it, Daniel? Where is the money in the world? No, because the money is not being invested. The money is somewhere, it's in the actives, it's in somewhere else. So we are trying to see where is the money, and we can't find it. We have found it, some of them, but anyway. And then, of course, we need to redesign fiscal incentives for industrial policy. We insist on a new form of industrialization to go towards an environmental push. And finally, we believe that there has to be some regional multilateral space to close policy asymmetries. We are not going to make it if we cannot forge regional and global agreements to reduce evasion, avoidance, and illicit flows. We need two to tango. If tax evasion is happening here, somebody somewhere is receiving this money. So we need their agreement. Reduce harmful tax competition. That is, if the companies come to exploit the same mineral in the Dominican Republic and in Peru and in Chile, why don't they pay the same why don't we level up instead of race to the bottom, which is what's happening today? And reduce global asymmetries and strengthen dialogue with transnational corporations. We definitely need these are the key players of the international community. So thank you very much. I hope I have given you an overview of this panorama. Sanjeev, thank you so much. And I hope you will find it interesting.